guys? Welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be talking about a topic that I wish I'd have known more about when I started this whole bodyweight journey, and that is my basic mobility routine. Before we jump into today's video, I want to mention a few points about this video. The first is that this is a general basic mobility routine. Mobility is kind of a huge thing. Everyone has different levels of mobility in different areas. It's a very complex beast. Everything's interconnected. There's loads of different reasons why certain points could be tight and certain points could be stronger than weaker. And there's also a million different ways to skin that cat. Just remember, this is general. I'm putting this out here as kind of like a base point to get started. So, you know, often this seems very confusing where to start with, like all this load of mobility sort of stuff. I'm trying to give you a starting point that you can say, yeah, I get it now, I get the principles. I can then go off and I can find exercises and techniques that work for me and then apply that into this routine. The second, I want to say thank you to Emmet Lewis. Emmet is kind of the guy who helped me start discovering all of this. I found his loaded stretching video on Emmet's Blackboard. I will link to everything, by the way, in the description down below that I talk about today. He kind of opened my eyes to this whole way of mobilizing. Initially, I did stretching every day for like 2 years, and that really helped to initially get myself from a pretty poor position. I couldn't even touch my toes to begin with. Stretching every day, doing my full body stretching routine, which again you can find on my YouTube channel or in the description down below. That helped me go from not being able to touch my toes to being able to kind of move and get more agile. But I kind of hit this plateau, and this loaded mobility training is what helped me push through that. Not to say that I don't do any passive stretching anymore, I just kind of do a bit of both, but it's mainly that loaded stuff. And then on that note, I want to just mention the main difference between this style of training and just stretching is that there is flexibility and mobility. Now, FitnessFAQs, or Daniel, did a video on this, and I will link to that in the description, and you guys can check that one out. But basically, to summarize briefly, flexibility is passive and static stretching, and mobility is active and dynamic. And the main difference is you are either loosening a muscle and stretching out a muscle in passive flexibility, and then in mobility, you're looking at strengthening the end ranges of motion. So you're looking at getting strong, the places that your nervous system says, don't go there because you're gonna hurt yourself. You wanna get strong in those places, and then you become in more mobile rather than just loosening up muscles and making them slack. So there's a difference here. They're all needed at their appropriate times. For anyone who is interested, I wanna recommend, as I said, Emmet Lewis. Check out his YouTube channel, absorb all that good information. Secondly is the book Becoming a Supple Leopard by Kelly Starrett. That is just an incredible book. It's like the Bible of mobility. There's so much more than just load of stretching in there. There's like nerve flossing and all these weird different techniques for mobilizing joints and foam rolling and soft tissue work. So if you are really interested, then get that book, have a read. Very interesting. Lastly, my tip is be careful. This is not like static stretching. This is much more dynamic, much more intense, but it still should be low intensity. You're going to test yourself, and you're going to put your body, as I said, into ranges of motion that it would be unusual to. So please do not jump into this and be like, oh yeah, I can do that really hard progression. Jump straight into the hard progression, because you will get hurt and you will bust yourself up. Especially with loaded mobility work, you really have to start from the bottom and work your way up. You're going to be conditioning tendons and your nervous system along the way. So it's very important you start from the bottom and take it easy. Standard health disclaimer here. So let's jump into the video, guys. Hopefully now we've left our egos at the door, we can actually get on some proper training. So today I'm going to talk about my top 6 sort of movement patterns that we're going to be training for our mobility. The reason I say movement patterns is because, unlike static stretching where we kind of focus on one particular muscle, we're going to be focusing on kind of a compound movement. So this is going to be training lots of different muscles in lots of different ways. It's going to be training your nervous system as well. So it's a little bit different to static stretching, but this allows us to be a bit more general because we're targeting a range of muscles and nothing in particular. So we're looking at like core movement patterns that we can get better at. So how I'm going to lay this video out is I'm going to briefly mention the 6 different types of movement patterns that I'm going to be looking at today. But then I'm going to go through them, assess why they're important, and then I'm going to show you some exercises that you can also start to use in your mobility routine. And then finally, how to use those exercises to build your own routine and get started with this load of mobility lark. The first position we're going to be looking at here is our overhead mobility, or our shoulder flexion. How well can we get those hands overhead for moves like the handstand? Next, for our pattern 2, we're going to be looking at shoulder hyperextensions. This will come into things as basic as the dip and the press up, and then eventually something like the back lever. Then moving on to our third pattern, we're going to be testing our hamstrings and our calves here. I guess you could call this kind of hip flexion. And then moving on to our fourth pattern, the reverse, is our hip flexor and quad mobility. And this is kind of testing that hip extension ability. Then our fifth pattern is going to be the middle split, and here we're going to be looking at hip abduction and adduction. This is going to be important at making those higher straddle planche, straddle front lever, straddle back lever a lot easier. And then finally we move on to the squat. Now this is just kind of a absolutely essential movement, so I put that in there at the end. This is going to be focused around glute flexibility and general hip mobility. So before we jump into the mobility training and I share those exercises with you, I just want to make you guys aware of properly warming up for this mobility work. I would recommend that you choose a dynamic warm up. The examples I'm going to show you here just what I would personally do. If you want to check out the routine that I would choose, I've put it in the description down below with links to how to perform all of the warm-ups that I'm showing you currently, as well as the sets and reps described. So if you want to check that out, in the description down below. Otherwise, just do your general warm-up for the whole body. So jumping into our first pattern here, we're looking at that overhead shoulder flexion mobility. Now this is going to be essential for moves like the handstand, the planche, and inevitably the full bridge, which is kind of a pinnacle of full body mobility. I'm going to briefly mention my 3 favourite exercises. The first is going to be the elevated active cat stretch. Now the key here is that this is active. We want to keep our hips tucked, our core tight, and we really want to be pushing that scapula through our shoulder blades. So we should be pushing our chest as hard as we can towards the floor while maintaining that good hollow body position. You can do this as a 30 to 60 second hold or 5 to 10 reps with a hold on the last rep in the lowest position, maintaining that body position. We don't want to be overarching our lower back because it's not going to give us any benefit, and it's actually going to take away from the active nature of that stretch. The next exercise I want to recommend is the bridge. Now you can check out my full bridge tutorial on YouTube and find out what progression is right for you, but you inevitably want to hold this for 30 seconds at a time of a progression that suits you. Check out the video for more details. The last exercise is kind of a mixture of both shoulder flexion and shoulder hyperextension, and that is the shoulder Dislocates. These are just the most incredible exercise. You want to maintain that good hollow body position with your hips tucked and core tight, just as we did on the first exercise. And to make it harder, you want to move your hands closer, or you want to start adding weight. You want to perform this exerise for between 5 and 10 reps. Move your arms in before you start adding weight. So our second pattern is the shoulder hyperextension. This is essential for preparing the shoulders, the pecs and the biceps, especially in the tendons, for straight arm strength and just generally moving in bodyweight movement. So make sure you are extra careful with progressing through these mobilities. It will cover basic movements such as the push-ups, dips, and then the more advanced variations like a back lever. With all of these exercises, guys, you want to make sure you maintain straight, locked out arms the entire time. The first exercise I'm going to recommend to you is table rock stretches. Now with these, you can have your hand placement either at 90 degrees or completely turned out. I like somewhere in between. You want to maintain those locked arms, as I said. You want to essentially do a glute bridge. You want to keep your core engaged. You want to depress and retract your scapula and really extend up. You can do this for 5 to 10 reps with a 10 to 20 second hold on the last rep in that top position. Then moving on to the second exercise, it's kind of a variation on the first, but adding a twist. We're going to be doing the Thoracic Bridge. The same good form applies here, maintaining that locked out arm and scapular engagement. The only difference here is that we're only going to be wanting to do 5 to 10 reps in total, so that covers each arm. Make sure you keep it even. And then moving on to the final exercise of the German hang. Now this one you want to start especially slowly, so I'm not going to recommend anything more than a kneeling stretch to begin with. You then want to move on to a slightly more loaded stretch where you're actually putting some amount of your body weight through those elbows and those shoulders. Eventually you'd move up from jumping from that position into an inverted hang to properly prepare the shoulders and the biceps. And then eventually you'd move on to something like a skin the cat or just a full German hang. Be careful with this one, guys. It is very much down to bicep and elbow strength. This is a very important one, but also be careful. Again, you want to perform this exercise for either that 30-second hold or 5 to 10 reps with a hold at the end. So moving on to our third pattern, and that's our hamstring or calf mobility, where we're looking at that kind of hip flexion. This is going to be essential for stuff like the handstand press, where you need to be able to get a good compression in. It's going to be essential for the L-sit, as well as just general lower body mobility. The first exercise I'm going to recommend is the Jefferson curl. This is kind of the king of the postural chain. You're essentially going to curl from the top of your spine all the way down as far as you can go, keeping fully locked out legs, and then curl back up from the base of your spine all the way back up to the top. You're going to perform this for 5 to 10 reps with a 20-second hold at the bottom. Start off with this exercise with very little or no weight, and then work up and add some weight onto it. The next exercise is a single leg straight leg deadlift. Now the main difference here is that instead of curling our back over, we're just going to be maintaining a solid straight back with our core engaged, again with the locked out leg. This is also going to be a bit of a test of balance as well. You're going to want to perform this for 5 to 10 reps with a 10 to 20 second hold on the last rep in that most stretched out position. You can use weight, but again, this is more important to focus on quality. The final exercise is the head to toe. Now I'm not going to go too much into detail in this, but I will mention that you want to check out Emmet Lewis's full tutorial on this. I will put a link down in the description. However, I will say that most people would benefit from adding his ankle stretching that he does at the beginning to warm up for each of his head to toe sessions. It's just great at loosening up a very tight area in a lot of people. Now we have the opposites to that movement, and that is this sort of hip flexor or quad loaded stretching or hip extension. So here we're going to be looking at progressing for moves like the front splits, for opening our hips to the full bridge, and it also helps us to balance our hips in general so we don't have any of that anterior pelvic tilt going on. The first exercise I'm going to recommend is a very simple static lunge. Now here the main thing is to keep that core tight and those hips tucked. We don't want to end up going with an over or hyperextension of the lower back, because that's just not going to give us any benefit. It's going to take away from the active nature. We want to just focus on pushing our hips forward by engaging our glutes, and then we want to hold that position for about 30 to 60 seconds or pulse up and down for 5 to 10 reps and then hold on the last rep. You can also do this with weight by elevating your front foot and holding the weight between your legs. To make this exercise harder, you can also push your front foot or back foot further forward so you end up more towards a front split position. The next exercise we're going to be looking at are these natural leg extensions. Now I've put these into 3 different progressions. The first is these kind of just literally contracted reps. Here we're going to be focusing on contracting our glutes and keeping our core tight to open our hips into a posterior tilt. We don't want to keep them anterior, we're trying to literally just open them up. So it's very much a mind-muscle connection move. The next step up from this would be simply going into the furthest stretched out position and holding a static hold. And here again you want to try and maintain that good pelvic tilt. You want to keep those glutes really tight, and you also want to be engaging your scapula and pushing your chest up. And then we move on to the actual natural hamstring curls, again with the same good cues applying. We can perform this exercise for the 30 to 60 seconds with the static hold, or between 5 and 10 reps with a 20-second hold on the last rep. The final exercise is kind of a progression from the first exercise, and that is the loaded front split. So instead of having a bent front leg here like we would have in a lunge, we're going to go with a straight front leg. Now this is going to be very intense on the hamstrings, so don't start on this progression unless you've done a fair amount of loaded hamstring mobility, because it requires you to be quite strong in that locked out position. We want to perform this for 30 to 60 second holds, going as low as your body lets you. Next we move on to our fifth pattern, which is the middle splits. So we want to be able to do this exercise, I guess with the middle splits, because it looks pretty badass. This is probably my weakest point, and the main reason I actually am looking forward to improve it is to make things like the straddle planche, straddle front lever, straddle back levers a lot easier, because your body weight is going to be conducted down to a smaller lever. The first exercise I'm going to recommend for this is the horse squat. Now all you're going to do is start with your feet together, and you're going to do a simple 5-step, which is kind of the standard, where you kind of twist your heels out, then your toes out, then your heels out again until you get to 4, then you squat down and you twist your toes out for the final 5th, and you're going to hold that position as close to 90 degrees as possible. If you can't get anywhere near it, then maybe take a step in, only do a 4-step or a 3-step, and you're going to want to hold that position for 30 to 60 seconds. You can also add reps to this where you bounce up and down into that bottom end range and then hold it on the last rep, as we've discussed before. This exercise is pretty badass and I do really like it, so I would recommend. The next exercise are straddle ups. Now, I prefer these over to simple static middle split holds, simply because you're moving in and out of a range of motion. You're basically gonna start in a seated straddle and then, using some assistance from your arms, stand up from that seated position into a standing middle split hold and back down again. This is great at moving your hips in and out of that range of motion. Obviously, starting on a higher level is going to be easier, and then eventually you can start on the floor, and then if you're a true badass pro, you can lift yourself up without even using your hands. You want to perform this exercise for 5 to 10 reps and then a 10 to 20 second hold on the last rep when you're in that middle split position. The next exercise and last exercise is the pancake or seated good morning. Now, this is probably one of the loaded stretches that I've been doing the longest. You're basically going to use that seated straddle position and you're going to fold at the hips. Again, to make it easier, just like the straddle ups before, you're going to move your hips down. So the higher up they are, the easier it's going to be, and the lower down they are, the harder it's going to be. I think this exercise though benefits a lot from adding load, and that's where you're going to see the most results. So I suggest starting off light, but definitely add some weight, and you'll see here just the difference in my form compared to the first few, like from just adding 10 kilos. You want to move up and down for between 5 and 10 reps, and then you want to hold it on the last rep for that lot of time. And on to our last movement pattern now, and that is the squat. We're going to be basing this around more of our glute kind of mobility, but this will just kind of apply to general life, really. You need to be able to squat. It's important for legs, it's important for lots of movements, so we're just going to put that in there at the end because I think it pairs well with the middle split. The first exercise we're going to be looking at here is the 4-position lift. Now, this is a pretty unique exercise. You're going to have your front leg horizontal to your body and your back leg vertical to your body. So you have one leg externally rotated and the other internally rotated, and you're just going to be repping down from as close to a sitting position as you can get to, bearing in mind you might never actually get there, and then you're just going to go back up to that kind of kneeling position, and then we're going to finish on up with a hold at the bottom. Again, 5 to 10 reps with a allotted time hold at that bottom position. The second exercise is the active pigeon hold, kind of very similar to the first hold, but here we're getting an addition of a nice hip flexor stretch, as well as some glute activation there, keeping our body upright in an active place. We don't want to be using our hands for support if we can help it here, because that's going to take the tension off. We want to be holding this for between 30 and 60 seconds on each leg, and you're going to be wanting to keep it active. The last exercise in the squat is just doing the squat itself. Like, it is such a fundamental position to our lives. It should be a resting position. We should be pretty comfortable here. Doing something like the Ido's 30-30 squat challenge, where you squat 30 minutes a day for 30 days, or maybe even doing a dynamic warm-up exercise like this Ido Squat Clinic. Just anything to spend a little bit more time in here and get loose and feel comfortable in this position. But that is it for the exercises, guys. Now I'm going to go on and talk to you how you can put all these exercises into a routine that you can perform. So now we have all of those 6 movement patterns that we're going to be looking at, and you guys have seen some of the examples of exercises that you could use. Bearing in mind there is so many more than I've described, so this is kind of the tip of the iceberg, but I would say these are the best exercises in my opinion for each of these movement patterns. So now we can look at how we can arrange this into a routine. So there's 2 ways we can look at it. The first way is going to be with a pairing. So if you'll notice that a lot of these movements work antagonistically, like the hamstring and the hip flexor, so we can pair these in an A1, A2 fashion. this would look like A1 as shoulder flexion over head mobility, A2 as your shoulder hyperextension mobility, then B1 would be our hamstring or hip flexion mobility, B2 would be our hip flexor, quads or hip extension mobility, and then finally C1 and C2 would be our middle split and our squat mobility respectively. This is a great way to pair our exercises up and work at it progressively. The other way you could do this is just as one big circuit in the same exercise order as I've listed here, but just doing everything back to back. So this would look like the same as we've got here, except every single exercise would be an A letter, and then we go from number 1 to 6 from the overhead mobility all the way down to the squat mobility, and we just perform these back to back. I don't think there's any real difference in terms of what you prefer to do. I think if you went with the pairings route, you can then start adding the upper body pairing to the end of your upper body workout, or you can add some of the lower body pairings here and there, so you can kind of split it up a bit instead of doing the whole lot in one go. I personally prefer to split it up, and I will have my upper body mobility after upper body days, lower body mobility after lower body days, and I usually add in some core work in between as well, but I will perform each of those days as kind of a big circuit. So a combination of the two there, but those are the two ways that you can lay this out. Ultimately, in terms of volume, you want to be performing each of these areas of movement for between 2 and 4 sets per time we train. So this can look like 2 to 4 sets or 2 to 4 rounds per pairing that you do, or you can just do 2 to 4 rounds of the entire 6 exercises back to back. You don't really want to be resting too much in between, simply because these shouldn't be particularly intense. We can just kind of do them at more of a leisurely pace, but the main thing here is you want to be very present and you want to be aware of what your body is doing and making sure you're very tight and contracted the entire time. Make sure there's a good muscle memory connection. And in terms of how you would program this in a week, I think doing a minimum of 2 times a week is essential, and probably a maximum again of that 4 times. This is kind of the sweet spot. You can definitely add individual components in on a more regular basis if you want to. I don't think that would have any negative effects, but you certainly don't want to be training it less than twice a week. As with a lot of fitness progressions, you want to be hitting consistently. That is the most important aspect of our training. So as long as you're consistent, you will get the results. But that kind of sums up the routine. As I said, you can actually go into the description down below, and I've made a couple of downloadable PDFs that you can download and then just have offline in your hand and actually read through and write down and scribble on. So go check that out in the description down below, and I will leave you with an outro message. So now guys, you have the exercises, you have the routine structure. All you've got to do is put 2 and 2 together. Remember, as I said in the beginning of this video, please take it easy. These are unusual positions to be in. You don't want to jump straight into those advanced moves, especially on stuff like the German hangs and those kind of shoulder hyperextension positions. Your elbows will be under a lot of pressure and you're just going to have a bad time. So please start from the beginning, work your way up, use the knowledge that is online, have a look, have a read, find out more, experiment, and I'm sure you will get there. If you enjoyed this video today, guys, then please hit the thumbs up button. It really helps the channel out. If you have any questions, or if you're not sure about something, or if you think there's something that I've missed out, something important that I should be talking about, then leave a comment down below. Join the conversation. I'm always there replying to comments, replying to questions. Then if you know a friend who's really struggling with mobility, then maybe share this video with him and point him in the right direction to getting more mobile, more agile. I also do online coaching if anyone is interested in a more personalized approach to this sort of method, but I think most people will do pretty well with a general approach and listening to your body and experimenting yourself. That is it for today, guys. Thank you for watching. Have a strong week and peace.